want to welcome you here today. I want to welcome audience as well as our board members here today for this, our Policy and Legislation Committee meeting. In looking, we will at this juncture determine a quorum for this particular committee. I am here, David O'Shields. Ms. Rita Allison is here. Ms.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson is here and Ms. Kriminger is here. So we do have a quorum at this time. Welcome again to those of you in attendance. Thank you for your interest in the work of the State Board of Education. If there are any news media present, please announce your name and company. And at this point, we would like to recognize from Nickelodeon. This is Spencer Marinato, Ryan Certo, Eric Searleson, Aaron Brownlee, Cahill Green, Gracie Gilbert, and we appreciate the media being with us today. We really do. Thank you. At this time, we would like to approve the Policy and Legislation Committee minutes from December the 12th. Is there any objection to approving the minutes as presented? Hearing none, the minutes are approved by unanimous consent. Moving on, approval of today's agenda for February 13th, 2024. Is there any objection to approving the agenda as presented? Hearing none, the agenda is approved by unanimous consent. And at this time, we would also welcome Ms. Jackie Lynn. And we have others. We have others who are not members of the committee, but other members of, not of this committee, but we have others, Ms. Terraville, Mr. Walters, Ms. Collier, Ms. Shore, Ms. Lee, Dr. Hanley, and the rose between two thorns, John Tyler. So we do welcome each of those here as well. So thank you. In looking at public comment, we have some visitors first. Let me go to just the visitors only. Want to say a heartfelt appreciation to your coming, Christina Rucker, James Rathwaite, thank you. Ainsley Williamson, Ella Sudlick, Gianna Barbuska, Ella Sufelt, Tammy White, Miles Coleman, who also will present, Tamara Cox, Debbie Elmore, Jamie Gregory, Jordan Henry, Kathy Manis, Tracy Williams, and Kiana B. Sorry if I messed it up. In looking at public comment, one of the first things we have 9 people who have requested opportunity to speak. We have only 30 minutes of public comment time available, and with it, as it currently is, we would only give certain members the opportunity to speak. So what I am looking for, if you don't mind, subcommittee, is to think of it and change that due to the increased number of people wishing to provide public comment. I would like for someone on the committee to make a motion that we shorten the public comment length to 3 minutes per person. We can again get the 9 in so that we can hear from the 9 members on this matter. Will someone please be willing to make that motion?
I move that we shorten it to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Kriminger. Thank you very much. Will anybody second it?
I'll second it.
Thank you. Rita Allison will second it. Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. We will at this time hear from the members of the public over the next 30 minutes. Mr. Tyler, I'm assuming you will keep time for us. Please note that we will start your time when you step up to the podium, and we'll need to stop at the 3-minute mark. Because of the significant interest in providing public comment, if you're able to provide comment at this meeting this morning, if you would please, and it's a please, we would ask you not to sign up for public comment in the afternoon unless there's space available. So we have people who would like to come at this time, and I would like for the following to be brought forward, please. Melanie Shull, if Ms. Shull would come forward, please. And we will have 3 minutes once you approach the podium. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, good morning, distinguished board members. I come before you again today to reiterate the seriousness and urgency of passing Regulation 43-170 for the sake of the children. There are volumes of obscene, sexually explicit, and pornographic material, not only at the fingertips of minors in school libraries and on school-issued laptops, but being pushed on students through coercion, i.e. pizza parties, book banning celebrations, and other treats. The model for school district policies being used around the state for complaining about books and classroom materials was written by SCASL, by librarians, for librarians, and to protect librarians from any consequences for those exhibiting incorrigible behavior. In March of 2023, PACE for Lexington II began exposing a dangerous culture shift in education. One of the indicators of this shift surfaced through our investigation into Lexington II's media centers and online catalogs. We began with following the school district's book complaint policy and challenged 30 books. We followed this absurd policy to the T. This sent our district into a frenzy because they had not followed their own policy by having review committees already in place. We also prepared a 15-minute presentation for our school board and presented them with the notebooks of other pornographic books found in our libraries. We showed statistics and data for how our media center materials are not aligned with state standards on many levels. As a result of our persistence, the district suspended their policy. Through this very laborious process, it's been noted that the policy was written to intimidate parents, students, community members, district employees, or anyone else that feels the need to submit a complaint. Book review committees on the school level and district level include teachers and the very person whose actions are under scrutiny, the librarian. Only one parent is allowed to serve on each committee. Because of the policy's intimidation tactics, we've had parents, grandparents, teachers, and other school employees thank us for what we've been doing because they feel their children or grandchildren would suffer the consequences if they spoke up, or employees feared that their jobs would be in jeopardy if they spoke out. This is unacceptable. For the reasons I just gave, it's imperative that any taxpaying citizen be allowed to voice a complaint against books or classroom materials they feel are inappropriate. When families, students, and district employees feel unsafe to voice their concerns, others need to be able to step in. Though there are wonderful librarians serving our students well across the state, this reg must pass to protect our children from the growing number of bad actors who are intentionally pushing a dangerous agenda. We need the guardrails restored to protect children while on public school property. We need this reg now to ensure school employees are making good, sensible, and wise choices for everyone's benefit. Thank you for your time and your willingness to serve.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you. At this time, I would like to hear, or we would like to hear from Gina Rathwell-White, please. Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Gina Rathel White, a retired educator of 20 years in Lancaster County School District and USC. I'm here to speak about the proposed book banning regulations in our schools. My first argument is that the regulations are based on a flawed and arbitrary definition of age-appropriate materials. This definition is vague and subjective as it does not specify who decides what is suitable, how they decide, or what criteria they use. It also ignores the fact that students have different interests, needs, abilities, and experiences. Moreover, they are not consistent with the legal standards and precedents for determining what is obscene or indecent, which requires a consideration of the material as a whole, its artistic or literary value, and its effect on the average person. By using these terms, the regulations would effectively ban any book that mentions or depicts anything related to sex or gender, regardless of its educational information or artistic merit. However, I am not here to simply criticize the proposed regulations, but to offer some constructive suggestions. I believe that there are ways to respect the rights and interests of all parties involved without resorting to censorship or book banning. Here are some of my recommendations I hope you will consider. First, only parents or guardians should recommend books to be restricted. This would give them the responsibility and authority over their children's or ward's education and reading choices. Second, before recommending a book to be restricted, the parent or guardian should meet with the principal or the librarian where the book is available to try to find a solution to both sides. This would encourage dialogue and communication and allow them to understand each other's perspectives and concerns. Third, the number of books that anyone recommends to be restricted should be limited to 5 or fewer books at a time. This would prevent the abuse or misuse of the process and ensure that the parents and guardians are not censoring or banning many books that they may not have read or understood. It would allow the review board to review and respond to the recommendations quickly and efficiently, devoting more resources to each case. Our state is already the 7th highest state for banning books. We don't want these regulations to be used by bad actors to recommend up to 100 books at a time, which has already happened in some counties. Fourth, the committee that reviews the recommendations should be composed of parents or guardian, teachers and librarians, and at least one high school student who represents the different stakeholders and perspectives on the issue. This would ensure that the committee is balanced, diverse, and representative, and that it considers the views and interests of all parties. And finally, fifth, the books proposed for restriction should remain on the shelves available to students during the review process and only be pulled from the shelves if the review committee deems it necessary. In conclusion, I urge you to reject the regulations as currently written for banning the books in our schools and libraries and
Thank
consider
you.
my recommendations for
Thank you.
better alternatives.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to try to be fair with everyone with the 3 minutes. Thank you very much, ma'am. If I now could have Angelina Davenport. Did I do the name okay? Okay. I try hard as a teacher to get the names right because kids really take that seriously.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the board. My name is Angelina Davenport. I'm a resident of Berkeley County, represented incredibly well by Dr. Chris Hanley. I come before you today in full support of Regulation 43-170 as written, and I'd like to share why. First of all, nobody is trying to ban books. By definition, banning is the removal of any access to all, and that is not what we are talking about. We are talking about sexually explicit materials freely available to minor children in an academic setting and the lack of parental knowledge or consent. It does not take an expert to know that sexually graphic and obscene content has zero educational value and is completely inappropriate for kids. It does not take an expert to understand that we can discuss tough topics and be inclusive without knowingly exposing children to sexual obscenity that effectively promotes minors to participate in pedophilia, sodomy, violent rape, prostitution, and so on. For example, the movie The Sound of Freedom, a PG-13 movie, tells a powerful story about minor sex trafficking without a shred of sexually graphic content and was the #1 movie in America for quite some time. Yet our school libraries and even classrooms knowingly provide materials that graphically detail like encounters. Parents aren't being told, oh, and how dare we question it. Let me say that again. Parents aren't being told that our children have carte blanche access to what is effectively porn in our school libraries that our tax dollars fund, or that assigned coursework includes sexually explicit content, and we should be totally okay with it. If you have nothing to hide, where is the transparency? Here's what I'd like to know. When did teachers and librarians get to decide that sexually explicit content is okay for kids? My mom had to sign a permission slip for me to watch A Land Before Time, a G-rated movie, and now we include All Boys Aren't Blue excerpts in our AP Lang syllabus, with zero disclaimer that it is literally the most sexually explicit and controversial book in America. I know because it's happening to my kids. I know because I've challenged content in my county. And I know because it's happening because my child's high school English teacher continues to assign incredibly controversial content to this day without being honest at all what it actually is inside, and it has zero educational value. This is not a political issue. This is a moral issue that is being politicized. We are a moral people, are we not? A people that protects the innocence of children. But if anyone can please explain to me how sexualizing children is educational, right, or even good for that matter, I am literally standing right here. If it is too graphic to air on TV, say on the radio, or print in the paper, it is not for kids, period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davenport. At this time, if we have Matthew Truesdale, if Mr. Truesdale would please come forward. Thank you again for giving of your time to come today.
Thank you. My name is Matthew Truesdale. I teach at Wren High School in Anderson District 1. I'm against R43-170. I thought I would come today and speak on behalf of South Carolina writers, in particular Ron Rash and Pat Conroy. Those are writers who have won the hearts of our state citizens, who have been honored by our state, and who are revered by many in our state. The Prince of Tides changed the way I read. The Water is Wide made me think I could be a teacher, and like I said, I am a teacher now. I'm an English teacher up at Wren in Anderson 1. My students have read Ron Rash's East of Eden and the World Made Straight, Pat Conroy's The Water is Wide, and The Great Santini. Those are 4 books that could now be easily challenged and removed from our schools as they fail to meet the daytime TV content qualification of R43-170. My students have met Ron Rash and asked him questions about writing. They love that he spoke to them like regular people. My students have also met and discussed poetry with Tim Conroy, Pat's younger brother. They've heard Tim speak lovingly about Pat and kind of get the lesson that siblings can live in the same house, have the same parents, still have completely different childhoods. An amazing discussion that couldn't and wouldn't have happened if I had been denied access to the Prince of Tides as a junior at Daniel High School in Pickens County. So my thought was to give an impassioned defense of these writers and these books and how they led to valuable experiences with my students and how all of that would be in jeopardy with the passage of R43-170. But then I realized Ron Rash and Pat Conroy are white, Southern, straight, and male, so their books are not in jeopardy of being challenged by those that are a part of or support groups like Moms for Liberty. What they are against are diversity of writers, diversity of content. What they are after is power and not real dialogue. Besides the books of Ron Rash and Pat Conroy, my classroom library is filled with mature and diverse texts because I teach mature and diverse students, a few of whom are here today. Please allow teachers in their districts and their truly concerned parents to have the meaningful conversations about what gives literature value. Don't take that power away from us by adding the State Board of Ed to the appeals process. Once again, my name is Matthew Truesdale. I've been a South Carolina public school teacher for 21 years, and I stand against Regulation 43-170. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And thank you for the students that also attended. Thank you very much. We also have Lisa Kier. Kier? Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for your time today. Although I do not have kids of my own, I spent 10 years as a public school educator, care deeply about all of the kids in our state, and greatly appreciate that my voice is not restricted from sharing a different, but perhaps very relevant perspective into the importance of accepting policy 43-170. I have spent every day for the past 8.5 years working with Lighthouse for Life to fight the ugly realities of sex trafficking in our state. I have seen many individuals whose lives have been broken and shattered by this industry. We all know the horrors of even just one instance of rape, but compound that by over 1,800 instances in a year, and you are only beginning to realize a victim's possible reality. Their bodies have become nothing more than a product to use and abuse. The Attorney General's State Task Force came out with a report that identified over 460 minors in our state that they believe are likely victims and admit that this is a far cry from the probable thousands affected. It is believed that this criminal industry is overtaking the drug market in prevalence, and we all know that drugs is in every school, so I guarantee you that sex trafficking is as well. How do you think this abuse is impacting their entire lives, let alone their education? Why is this ugly sex industry making such a tidal wave of destruction in our state? I believe, like any profitable business, it comes down to a product that is really being sold, sex. Everybody has an interest in it, and everybody has a vulnerability around it. This makes it easy to exploit. Kids are born with a natural curiosity about their bodies and eventually about sex. This is normal, healthy, and should be supported. But sex impacts an individual's body not only physically, but psychologically, emotionally, and socially. It needs to be taught in a healthy context from safe adults who can help them navigate all of these aspects. When that doesn't happen and their only exposure is an explicit graphic, text, or video that they stumble upon, they become highly susceptible to exploitation. Their curiosities are piqued, their bodies are engaged, but they've never been taught when it's safe to say yes or no, or what the content that they're exposed to is an accurate representation of love. This makes them ripe for traffickers to come in and ask things of them that seem normal, or start with consent and then later turn into a life they never wanted but don't know how to control or get out of. The average age of exposure to pornographic content is 8 years old. We need to be extremely careful about the books, videos, and content we are exposing our kids to without supervision from safe adults to help them navigate what they are learning. Some kids in public schools have those safe adults at home helping them, others do not. Public schools should be a safe place for learning. But what is the true education they are getting if we don't monitor these MOOCs? Creating a uniform policy across our state that defines age appropriateness and establishes the parameters around sexual content will ensure that every district is equipped to not only make their schools a safe place for appropriate education, but will also be protecting their students from a life of sexual abuse in the world of sex trafficking.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. At this time, we have Patrick Kelly, if Patrick is here. Thank you very much. Mr. Kelly.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you this morning. Patrick Kelly, speaking on behalf of Palmetto State Teachers Association. I've spoken to the full board about this regulation, so I'll be brief in my remarks. I want to say thank you for the opportunity for public feedback, for being receptive to and giving ample opportunity for the public to give feedback on this proposed regulation, because it is significant. This touches the instructional materials that every child in every school across this state will interact with, and we want to make sure that they have access to the highest quality materials as well as age-appropriate materials. The two things that I would just surface and ask you to continue to consider that I emphasized in my initial comments to the full board several months ago is, number one, to be careful and precise with the language defining age-appropriate. As the regulation is currently written in Section 1 in definitions, it talks about a description of sexual conduct as defined in Title 16 of State Code. There are lots of things in Title 16 that do not need to be in a school library. To the point that was just raised, sexually explicit materials certainly do not need to be in a public school library in South Carolina. But the language description of sexual conduct is overly broad to the point that it could end up catching a wider net of materials than what the regulation is intended to catch. And let me give you a simple example. Title 16, subsection CA, defines sexual conduct, among other things, as sexual intercourse of the, quote, normal or perverted kind. The book of Matthew defines a man and a woman coming together in marriage as, quote, two becoming one flesh. That is a description of sexual conduct, sexual intercourse of the normal kind. Now, is it explicit or graphic? Of course it is not. Is it inappropriate in a classroom? No, it's not. But if you use overly broad, non-precise language like description, you run the risk of having the complication of that being subject to a challenge. That also opens the door to most of Shakespeare's works, which of course would not be age appropriate in a kindergarten classroom, but it's also not textually appropriate in a kindergarten classroom to ask a kindergartner to read Shakespeare. But you're going to catch a lot of that. You'll catch Of Mice of Men. You'll catch Scarlet Letter that I can remember reading as a high school senior. There's nothing explicit or graphic in Scarlet Letter, but there's a description, there's a reference to. So I would encourage you to further define what it means by description. The concerns I've heard from parents in this meeting and in a few past meetings is about explicit or graphic content. I would encourage you to make sure that the definition of description is according to that point. The other thing I would bring to your attention is Section 4 of the draft regulation allows any resident of a school district to bring a complaint. I would encourage you, as I've done in the past, to narrow that field to the same narrow field of complainants available.
Thank you, Pat.
Yep,
Patrick.
sorry. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
But I
sir.
think we got the germane characteristic of what you were asking for. Thank you, sir. All right, at this point, is Tricia Kling here, please?
Good morning.
Good
I'm a
morning.
resident from Lexington Richland School District 5 and speaking as an advocate for students' mental health and their tax-paying parents' rights to have protective measures in place, specifically as it relates to the selection of reconsideration of instructional materials. Speaking as a professional with my doctorate in educational leadership, concentrating in educational psychology, and having 30 years of experience as a teacher, counselor, school psychologist, and district-level leadership, I fully support R43-170. I agree 100% with our state superintendent of ed that we must establish a clear, transparent, uniform process that provides certainty for local educators, respects the legitimate prerogatives of parents, and protects students from materials that are not age or developmentally appropriate. Providing local school districts with consistent definitions and standardized measures in determining age and developmentally appropriate and educationally suitable materials aligned with state educational standards will eliminate the heavy burden of local school boards in defining when choosing and justifying when questioned what is appropriate and suitable for each age, grade, and/or developmental level. I have personally seen well-intended selection committees place absolutely inappropriate books in our libraries. I believe they had been hoodwinked or blatantly deceived by greedy publishers pushing books to a larger population under the title of young adult, when in reality they were new adult, targeting ages 18 to 25. I applaud all educators who have taken the time to reevaluate and remove books that are explicitly sexual in nature, considered obscene or pornographic. This was done under much distress and weighty consideration. Had R43-170 been in place, prioritizing the core mission to educate would have superseded the confrontational narrative of book banning due to the allowance of inappropriate books that should never have been there in the first place. R43-170 eliminates this pressure by giving definitions of appropriate and suitable literature for students of all ages and developmental levels. Terms like sexually explicit, obscene, pornographic, indecent, young adult, new adult, inappropriate, appropriate, must all be clearly defined to give clarity and transparency. There are reasons for such guidelines as they provide protective measures for our youth. Research shows that premature exposure to developmentally inappropriate material may lower emotional security, cause poor mental health, as we see, trigger past trauma, exacerbate ongoing trauma, shape negative or unrealistic attitudes, behaviors, or expectations regarding relationships or intimacy. In closing, I support fully R43-170 as it will realign valuable resources to support educational goals and decrease indoctrination. Through its provision of clear and consistent guidelines, schools will be able to build collections that expand upon the classics.
All right, thank you.
Clearly align with state standards and provide educationally sound, academic,
thank you
rigorous,
again.
and fundamentally important education
Thank you.
materials. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this point, we have Mary Foster.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I am Mary Foster. I've lived in Beaufort County for over 19 years with my husband and our 2 children. I'm a very proud parent, a teacher, and a proud board member of FAB, Families Against Book Bans. I had the honor of speaking to your full board in November where I addressed my concerns regarding 43-170. Teachers and librarians don't come to school each day to harm or endanger children. Quite the opposite. Children and young adults in South Carolina are not suffering because they have access to too many books. For the last year, I attended the majority of our local school board meetings in Beaufort County as we worked to fight attempts by just 2 individuals to ban 97 books in our county. On more than one occasion, I witnessed the people who wanted books removed from shelves attack those of us in opposition to them by calling us names, posting threatening rhetoric on social media, including photographs of guns, and even yelling at students who were brave enough to show up and speak their minds, including my own daughter. She was 17 at the time. I sat in a Beaufort County board meeting last summer when one of the most vocal supporters of the book challenges strolled up to the podium to make a public comment. He carried a large bag, became angry speaking to the board, and ultimately removed small bags of chicken feed and lobbed them at our school board members. The regulations you're considering will enable people like the individual I've described and others like him to continue their menacing and threatening acts. These regulations would mean every school district in South Carolina would need to review every piece of curriculum material and every book on every classroom and library shelf to ensure that nothing could be misconstrued as violating this vague policy. Who's going to go back through all these items already approved by our local districts, and how are we paying to replace them all? More importantly, what resources are teachers and students supposed to use in the meantime? The broad definition of terms in 43-170 eliminates access to thousands of books, many of which are used to prepare high school students for AP exams and success in college programs. How will our students then compete with students from across the country? These regulations will remove books that tell hard truths about history and some people's lived experience, including rape and sexual violence, and books that help young people become more empathetic and compassionate. These regulations will mean many students can no longer see themselves or their story in a book that they can read at school. And these regulations mean that for many students in South Carolina living at or below poverty level, what is likely the main access they have to diverse and engaging literature will cease to exist. You can make these regulations meaningful and supportive of parental rights and educators and librarians by making some simple but necessary changes. These regulations could protect students' fundamental rights to access information while providing parental rights with a statewide unified opt-out form. We can affirm educators and librarians, allowing for a reasonable and comprehensive review process that features the librarian on the panel. And finally, we
Thank
can
you.
limit, thank you so much for your
Thank
time and all
Ms.
you
Foster.
do.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker is Steve Newsom. Newsom, am I correct? Thank you, sir. I try hard.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I was an English teacher for 16 years, and I'm in support of a statewide regulation on book bans, or book challenges, I'm sorry. But the regulation will only do what it's intended to do with some major amendments. Most of these amendments have already been suggested by other speakers, including Patrick Kelly. Additionally, I believe all of the legitimate concerns raised about content today could be simply addressed with an optional opt-out form. So if you don't want your kid to read a book, fill out a form and they don't have to read the book. It's very easy to keep them from accessing it in the library because every district in the state uses PowerSchool and we can flag that easily. One supporter of the current language this morning essentially called for this, highlighting the advantage that giving parents information about text and an opportunity to opt out. And I think that could avoid all of these issues without removing books. If the real goal is to protect specific individual children from books that would be harmful to them, we already have a state law against pornography in libraries. I don't think we need additional regulations to remove books, but if we are going to go that route, I think some great amendments have been suggested. As FOIA requests reveal in multiple districts, including Lexington 2, most book challenges in the state have been about sexual content on the surface, but not coincidentally, they have focused heavily on books that are dealing with issues of race, that are depicting the lives of LGBTQ plus people. Those things are not illegal and they're not obscene. And I think that if the good faith effort is to protect children from specific problematic material for those children, again, an individual sort of response to that would be like an opt-out form, speaking to teachers and librarians. Most of these things are available already, but I think a statewide regulation sort of codifying that would be really useful. I did also want to really quickly respond to some points that Mr. Coleman made a few months ago, which I didn't really get a chance to address at any of those meetings. I do think it should be stated that Mr. Coleman is professionally involved in a movement called Release Time Bible Instruction, and I have no personal issue with allowing students during the school day time for religious instruction as long as it's fair to students of all religious backgrounds. But I do think that his legal experience related to both religious instruction and school administration shows that he was either misinformed or deliberately misleading in some of his comments when this regulation was first introduced. 3 minutes don't really let me get into all the various passages that could, as Mr. Kelly pointed out, result in lots of books, including the Bible, being removed under the current language. But I do think we really need to address how broad that language is. I'm also happy to share lots of examples with you via email if that's helpful. And we also don't have to speculate that policies like this are going to lead to lots of removals because we've seen it all over the state.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Newsom. Thank you very much. Thank you, each and every one of you, for presenting. And I want to say thank you. As State Board, it is our policy to accept comments as information. Should we have questions or need additional information, we will certainly contact you at a later date.
It's fine if not, but I was wondering if there was time for a short response from a member of a stakeholder group not already represented. It's, I respect your time, though, if not.
All right, there will be public comment this afternoon, but thank you. Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. And again, guys, I'm 65, I understand. I think in America, some of the things that bother me the most are the fact that we seem not to be able to listen to other people. I appreciate varying sides, varying people, varying arguments, varying thoughts. America was brought forward on this, and I went into education, not ministry, so I'll leave it at that. At this time, I would like to bring Miles Coleman forward, please, with the proposed amendment Regulation 43170 on behalf of the SDE. Mr. Coleman.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to all of you as well. The last time I was here, I subjected you all to a lengthy lecture on constitutional law. I will hope to be more brief in my remarks this morning. Just to give you a little bit of a roadmap of what I'd like to do with our time together this morning. First, I want to give a few introductory comments and remarks. Second, I'd like to review the proposed changes that I believe you have in front of you this morning. Third, I'll respond to a few of the comments and questions that were already raised during the public comment period. And fourth, of course, I'll stand ready and happy to answer any questions that any of you might have. So first, a few introductory comments. I'll spare you reintroducing myself and my experience and training in this field of the law. I will just comment that previously I'd been asked to review and then comment to the board on the initial draft of this regulation, and particularly as concerned its legal defensibility and its compliance with existing case law. And I'm here again. I've been provided a day or two ago with a copy of the proposed changes. I've been asked to review it and comment to you all on those changes and their effect on the legal defensibility or alignment with precedent that they would have. When I signed in at the foyer of the room this morning, I was given the choice of visitor, for the regulation, or against the regulation. And the officiant there asked, well, are you for it or against it? I said, I don't fit on either of those sheets. I'm just here to talk about it. I'm not here for it or against it. I'm an umpire who's here to call a ball, call a strike, call walks, and call fouls. And so I just want to talk to you about what the reg does and what the changes are that are in it. So that's the introduction. Let's look at it. We'll go through page by page. You'll see where there's strike-throughs to indicate stricken materials and underlining to indicate new materials. Some of them I think we can move through pretty quickly. The majority of them, from my review, appear to be administrative in nature and intended to facilitate the implementation. And as I understand it, the department's leadership and staff have had a conversation with various stakeholders, some of the groups that you've heard represented this morning, teachers, parents. They've reviewed public comment. They've reviewed input from various industry groups or associations, librarians, teachers, school boards, and the like. So my understanding is that some of these comments are also responding to feedback they've received through that process as well. All right, top of page 1, definitions. You'll see there the words South Carolina K-12 public school have been inserted in 2 places. I think that's just to clarify, as I understand it, that the scope of this is South Carolina public schools. So if anything, that slightly narrows the regulation or clarifies its applicability. Partway down the page, you'll see under subsection B, again, South Carolina K-12 public school. I think that's a non-substantive clarification. Subsection C, you'll see this is probably, in my view, as I review this, the one substantive alteration. It's a point that, as you'll recall from a couple of months ago in the public comment period then, and already in the public comment period this morning, was a source of some consternation by members of the public who have reviewed it. That had to do with, initially, the inclusion of the Federal Communication Commission's guidelines on obscenity. I think there's been concern that that would be potentially difficult to apply. It could require the involvement of lawyers to interpret and apply precedent. And so you'll see there that has been stricken out. The effect of that, in my estimation, is to simplify and clarify the application of the regulation, and if anything, to narrow its reach. If you keep looking down the page toward the bottom under Roman numeral 2, you'll see one instance in which a reference to school-sponsored extracurricular activities has been changed to school-controlled extracurricular activities. Again, I don't think that's a substantive change, but to the extent it is, it narrows the scope of the regulation. Let's flip over to page 2. At the top of page 2, you'll see a new subsection B that's been added. My understanding is that this was essentially a scrivener's error that had been in the formatting process previously been omitted. We can look at it briefly. I don't think it alters the meaning or the effect of the regulation. It starts out with what is, I believe, an uncontroversial proposition that each school district board of trustees is ultimately responsible for the selection and continued use of all instructional materials. I say that's uncontroversial because a school district board is ultimately responsible for everything that happens in the operation of a school district, in the same way that a corporation's board is ultimately responsible for everything that happens in the corporation. You'll see it continues. This includes both the selection of new materials and the retention and continued use of materials already in place. Halfway through that, and I think this is worth note, I'll just read it to you so we can read it together. A district's board may, but is not required to, prospectively review and assess its existing instructional materials for compliance with this regulation. Let me pause briefly there. That, I think, is a response to one comment that we've already heard this morning, which is, in fact, I think, well taken, right? It would be burdensome if the reg were to require a school district, a school, or teachers to affirmatively and prospectively read and review every piece of instructional material in the district. That'd be quite an undertaking, but the reg doesn't require that. I don't think it required it before, and it's more clear now than it even was before. That's not required. There's no affirmative requirement to go out and review instructional materials. Let's keep reading. Alternatively, a district's board may review and assess existing instructional materials compliance with this regulation on a case-by-case basis if and when material is challenged pursuant to the procedures set out in this regulation. Again, if anything, that lessens the administrative burden that may have been perceived to have been previously caused by the regulation. I think it clarifies what is and is not required. We can keep looking. Subsection D, about halfway down the page. This is also, as I understand it, in response to comments made both 2 months ago and today. You'll see at the conclusion of that, previously, the regulation had stated, and I'm summarizing, that any person, any taxpayer essentially residing in the district could challenge the inclusion of a book. As public comment, again, both previously and today, as indicated, that's been of some concern, I believe, to the public, to districts, and to some administrators. So that's been narrowed, you'll see here, to say, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. That change is going to apply later in the reg, which we'll see about who can challenge a book. You'll see here, it refers to who can request a list of materials being used in a given class. So it's not any member of the public, it's someone who has a child in that district. Moving on down the page, I don't think there's a few, looks like typo or, not typo, that's the wrong word, syntactical cleanups that occurred there that I don't think have any substantive effect. If we flip to, well, it's the it's the third page, although it says page 2 at the bottom because there was a cover page. You'll see about a quarter of the way down under Roman numeral 4, and this is what I got ahead of myself a minute ago. You'll see here it refers to not any person residing within the district, but rather the parent or legal guardian of a student who is in the district can bring a challenge. You'll see also in that section adding a requirement that the person seeking to challenge a particular piece of materials shall have first made a good faith effort to address those concerns regarding noncompliance at the school level or the district level. Again, I wasn't part of the conversations, but my understanding is that the inclusion of that new language there was in response to comment and feedback from the public and stakeholders. Looking at subsection A, let's see. So when a complaint is filed, excuse me, on the standardized complaint form, the district has to make that form available on its website. And again, the idea here, if you'll remember, part of the goal of this, and we talked about this at greater length the last time I was here, was to ensure simplicity, clarity, and uniformity. Right now, there's a patchwork quilt of ways this is handled. One of the ways that uniformity can be achieved is not only through a uniform standard applicable across the state, but the regulation contemplates a uniform complaint form, and that's what's being discussed in that third line down of subsection A. It'll be a standardized complaint form that the district will make available to the parent or legal guardians. You'll see again at the bottom of that subsection A, the complainant, the person submitting the form, shall verify on the form that he or she has made a good faith effort to address their concerns at the school level or district level. And again, my understanding, though I wasn't part of the conversations, is that that's in response to feedback. Bottom of that page, subsection B, previously there was a 60-day shot clock to resolve. As I understand it, that was viewed by districts and district boards as perhaps an unduly swift schedule that might not accommodate perhaps over the summer break if they have a month that they don't meet. That's been expanded to 90 days. Halfway down there through subsection B, you'll see that in a similar way that even this morning this committee has, in a reasonable and even-handed, a fair way, tried to accommodate both the public's right to comment, both for and against, but also the fact that we have a limited amount of time. And so, for example, this morning, the board in its discretion, or the committee rather, in its discretion, I think it was a 3-minute limit, and it was limited to a certain number of speakers. We're essentially acknowledging that a district board, while we do want there to be public comment and participation, can, in its discretion, impose reasonable and even-handed limits. Again, you can't allow just one side to speak and not the other. It needs to be even-handed and allow equal access there. You'll see also that a district board may, in its discretion, so this is optional, not required, in advance of such a meeting, refer the complaint to a committee of the board that it composes. And again, as I understand it, this doesn't change the effect of the law, but would, as we've heard this morning, perhaps lead to efficiencies. We don't know, but it's possible, I suppose, that there will be a wave of complaints that comes in, and I think the thinking is that it would be unduly burdensome to require the entire board to go through and discuss them all one at a time. So the thinking here, as I understand it, is that a committee, or perhaps multiple committees of the board, could be given books to review and then report back to the full board with a report and recommendation that the full board would consider and adopt. I would just point out that, by way of analogy, that happens in a number of other regulatory contexts or in the court system where there are matters that can be first reviewed and then reported for further consideration. If we flip to the next page, at the bottom it's marked as page 3. Subsection D, you'll see there's some new language there. So this is discussing the procedure after a school district board has made a decision, if that gets appealed to the State Board of Education. Upon receipt of the written appeal, the state board will notify the districts or otherwise make available to them, for example, on a website or something like that, a list so that the school districts throughout the state will be aware of what materials are pending on appeal at the state board. The idea here is, right, to avoid duplication of effort and increased efficiency. If the state board is about to consider a particular piece of material and either find it appropriate or not appropriate for inclusion, there's really no point in having multiple district boards doing the same thing when in fact they could just wait and find out what the result is. So as I understand it, that's an attempt to increase some efficiency and avoid some duplication of effort. I don't think there are any other changes on that page to discuss. If we flip to the next page, page 4 at the bottom, excuse me. About halfway down through that page, you'll see in subsection C, this allows for an option when a district board has received a complaint, they can request that the state board just take it. I'll give you the analogy this way. In our court system, our state court system, appeals go in almost every instance, and I won't get into all the exceptions, death penalty and things like that, but in most instances, an appeal goes directly to our Court of Appeals, the intermediate court. Typically, what would happen is the Court of Appeals would consider and rule on a case, and then one of the parties would ask the state Supreme Court to hear the case. But in some instances, the state Supreme Court can on its own say, that's an interesting case, and we'd like to save some time, and we'll just decide that ourselves right off the bat. In other instances, a party to the case that's at the Court of Appeals or the Court of Appeals itself could say, we know this case is going to get to the Supreme Court eventually, so let's just save ourselves a couple of years of time. Supreme Court, would you just please take the case right now? And sometimes the court will do that. I've had it happen a time or two. It's the same idea here. District has the complaint. In the normal course of events, the district would decide it, and then a party could appeal it to the state board. But we're saying there's an option here that the district could say, we think this case is going to end up in front of the state board anyway, so why don't y'all just go ahead and take it, and we'll save some time and effort. It gives this board the right to accept such a request or to decline it. So it doesn't mandate that you take a case in such a case, but it allows it. I don't think there's anything further on that page. And our last change to discuss on page 5, you'll see excuse me, a new subsection D at the end, essentially saying that nothing in this regulation alters or diminishes the already existing right, constitutional right recognized in case law and recognized in our statutes, that parents do have a right to opt out of certain materials. So even if a book has been reviewed and deemed acceptable and it's in a library, but nevertheless, some parents think, I don't want my kids as part of that lesson. For example, I can think of instances, actually I know some court cases right now pending where, for example, Muslim parents wanted to opt their kids out of a certain piece of instructional material that for religious reasons or political reasons they didn't think was appropriate as a matter of their faith. So they're allowed to opt out of that. That's what we're trying to accommodate here, is that if for some reason a parent wants to opt out, which is a right they already have, this is not a new thing being granted. We're recognizing the existence of such a right and saying this doesn't alter or change. All right, that's the end of part 2 of what I wanted to say, which was to walk through these. I think we can pick up the pace a little bit through here. Last thing that I want to talk about before taking any questions from you, excuse me, is to respond to a few of the comments that we heard this morning. And of course, I, like you, appreciate the thoughtful nature and the preparation that obviously everyone had made before coming in to help this board in its deliberative capacity ensure they've thought carefully about the regulation and promulgate a regulation that is most efficient, most suitable, and in the best interests of the students, parents, and teachers in the state. There's a couple that I'll mention, maybe in reverse order. First, one of the comments that was made is that in practice, and I don't know if this is true or not, nationally or across the state, but the allegation is that in practice, challenges to books often, or at least in some instances, involve matters of race or LGBTQ issues. That may be true, I don't know, but nothing in this regulation makes it more or less likely that such books would or would not be challenged. In fact, that's not the subject of this regulation at all. The definition of age appropriateness is completely race neutral, has nothing to do with race at all, and it's also completely neutral in terms of its treatment of what types of sexual descriptions, depictions, conduct are at issue. So I don't see any way in which this regulation puts a finger on the scales one way or the other at all on issues of race, sexual orientation, or gender identity. One of the other comments, I already addressed this briefly, was the perception previously that this regulation required districts, I guess, to spend the summer going and reading 100,000 volumes just to check and make sure they were okay. That wasn't required before, and now it's clearer, I believe, in the regulation. It expressly says that's not required. In fact, the district doesn't have to do that, right? You've just deputized 10,000 parents that if they think there's something, right, they're the ones who have to go do that work. They're going to go review the books. And if they think there's something wrong, then they can file the complaint. The one before that, this was a comment from Mr. Kelly, which I actually greatly appreciated. As a lawyer, it's very helpful to be able to grapple with specific instances, specific problems, and I appreciated his clarity in providing a specific instance in which he thought the regulation was overbroad. You'll probably recall he referred to the fact that in the biblical book of Matthew, it refers in one passage, and at least in one interpretation or translation of the Bible, to marital sexual intercourse as two becoming one, or two coming together. And his thought, his concern was that perhaps in this regulation, it refers to a description of sexual conduct. And the question is, would that phrase from the biblical book of Matthew constitute a description of sexual conduct? Again, I appreciate the comment because that's a specific example that we can think about and that we can grapple with. Here would be my response. In other contexts, and it's not unusual in the law, in other contexts, to determine what constitutes an adequate description of something. So you might think, for example, if you had hired a contractor to build a commercial building and the statement of work or the RFP describing what the building was supposed to have in it said it needs to be ADA compliant, including elevators as necessary. And subsequently, the contractor went and built the building, and maybe they didn't put the elevator in the place that made sense. Maybe it only went to the second floor and not to the third floor. Maybe they forgot to include it entirely. And the question would be, was their placement of that elevator compliant with the contract? The argument, and I've been in cases like this before, the argument's going to be, well, was that particular event or item described in the contract? Well, the contract said it needs to be ADA, Americans with Disability Act, ADA compliant, including as necessary an elevator. It mentioned the elevator, but did it describe it? In that context, and again, we're reasoning by analogy here, you would say the contract didn't describe the event or the conduct with sufficient particularity to say that the contractor was in breach of the contract. All it said was ADA compliant, including an elevator if necessary. You put an elevator in. We could think of other examples, right? From history, for example. We could think of an event from history, let's say World War II. It's possible that a book could mention, right, a book that's not about World War II, but that mentions in passing, let's say it's a book about population increases. It said, in the aftermath of World War II, many GIs returned home, started families, and as a result, we saw what's commonly known as the baby boom, the boomers. It mentioned World War II. It mentioned that people returned home from an armed conflict, but did it describe World War II? I would argue not. We could think of other examples, and I won't belabor the point too much further than this, in which the acknowledgement of the existence of a thing or the performance of an act can be acknowledged without describing it. And I think that's the point, is description entails more than simply acknowledging something's existence. Or, again, let's go back to the example, because I think examples are helpful, especially in this context. Let's look at the book of Matthew. When it says that the two become one, is that a description of sexual intercourse? I'd be hard-pressed to say that that's a description. It is metaphorical, right? The two do not literally become one human. It's a metaphor. It's an analogy, and the scriptures are full of analogies like that. But I think I'd stop short of saying it's a description. Now, what's the point? I would expect that you can expect, if this regulation is finalized and goes into effect, that there will be people who we could perceive as from the political right challenging certain books that they think are inappropriate. And there may very well likely be people from the political left or who oppose the regulation who bring challenges to books like the Bible or Brave New World or Shakespeare to test the system, right? We're going to test the process and see what works. So we need to think about it in advance. We do. And I think that the description we've got here is not going to ban the Bible. In fact, you'll see from other examples across the country, it hasn't. There was one instance in Utah when a policy like this was in fact tested, and a school board in a message sending vote banned the Bible, and it made headlines. It didn't last, and it didn't hold up under scrutiny. I'm not aware of any other instance other than that one, which again didn't last long, in which anything like that has been tried. Final thing I'll say in response to a comment earlier. You've heard that this morning that the definition of age appropriate is allegedly vague and subjective because it doesn't explain who decides what the standard is or exactly what the rules are. Respectfully, I don't think you can read the regulation and come to that conclusion. It does clearly explain what the standard is in what in the law we would refer to as a bright line standard. It's as close to a clear, defined line in the sand as is possible in the law to make. So I think that's pretty clear what the standard is. As far as who decides, well, the school district does. They apply that standard. And then if there's an appeal, this board decides. That's who decides. Again, I certainly appreciate the comments we heard this morning, and I think it is important for us to consider them and respond to them appropriately. I think that goes through sort of what I had prepared to say. If there are questions from this body, I'm happy to entertain them and answer them if I'm able.
All right, thank you very much. From the committee members, are there any questions for the presenter? Now, if there are questions, you can raise your hand. So if I may, sir, just sort of as a attempted recap, just sort of making sure for my own edification and for understanding as to what the round one draft to round two draft is, it eliminates reference to the FCC provisions to simplify and clarify the definition of age and developmentally appropriate.
Correct.
Secondly, it limits complaints to those brought by parents or legal guardians of students in the district who have made a good faith effort to address concerns with school or district staff prior to bringing a complaint.
That's correct.
I'm just trying to make sure I'm hinging on the important things. Clarifies that the State Department of Education will create a standardized complaint form for statewide use to bring uniformity and simplicity through the process.
Yes.
Clarifies that the districts retain the freedom to determine how or if they retrospectively review existing materials for compliance. That was something we talked about.
That's right.
That we provide local boards with the opportunity that they may suspend an appeal if an appeal of some similar material is pending before the State Board of Education.
The only slight nuance I'd say, they can stay, which would be they can pause their consideration if the same material is on appeal to the State Board.
That's right.
Same
Someone
exact
else
book.
is doing it, we're just going to hold
Right.
to see what happens. Extends the period for a local board to consider a complaint from 60 to 90 days, and clarifies that a board may appoint a subcommittee of members of the same to review complaints and make recommendations to that full board.
Correct.
And then gives local boards the option to ask the state board to take jurisdiction over the complaint.
That's right, and gives the State Board the option either to accept or decline that request.
And that, yeah, and I didn't clarify that. Are those pretty much from round one to round two, draft one, draft two, pretty much?
I'm afraid I have to say yes, although you did that in about 12 minutes shorter than I did, but yes.
No, but you're a much better lawyer than I would ever hope to be. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chair, can you tell us what happens next? so that we'll all understand.
I would defer to legal counsel on that, because as chair, I would say that we would take it, and as a committee, we would then bring it forward to the full board for this afternoon. But now, where it goes from here, sir, I'll have to defer to you.
At a fairly high level, that's right. So if this committee moves it forward, then the full board would hear it this afternoon. If they move it forward, then like any other state regulation, it goes to the General Assembly. It's actually slightly more complicated than that. It goes separately to the President of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. Those two leaders of those two chambers would then refer it to the appropriate committee within that chamber, which would then each review it, and then together, by joint resolution, either adopt it, ask for changes to it, or decline it.
Thank you.
If we do not vote to approve it, what happens?
If this committee
Right.
does not,
Right.
I'll have to refer that question to your parliamentarian.
If the committee does not refer it to the full board today, it stops here.
Are there any other questions, either of our council or of our parliamentarian?
I do, just, sir. So parents do have that option to opt out of the material.
Parents currently, under state statute, have the option to opt out of classroom instructional material, which is distinct from libraries or other types of instructional materials. But yes, as to classroom instructional material.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lynn.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I have general comments when it's that time. So I don't have a question for the speaker.
Yeah, right. I mean, at this point, what I was looking at is in an effort to try to move it along, because there are other committees to follow us, was to try to limit conversation among the members here, unless there is some incredibly burning issue that would need to be brought up. But should then it go forward, then at that point, I would think anything and everything, because the full board would then be undertaking it. That would be my thought. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the hard work that was done from what it was to what it now is, and the efforts that went in. So thank you tremendously much.
Certainly.
Thank you, sir. All right. At this time, I will entertain a motion. Is there a motion to approve the regulation as presented by Mr. Coleman?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a comment along with, prior to making the motion. This committee has received hundreds of emails, texts, and phone calls across the whole board with this. And we're very thankful for that, because it has led for great conversation, in-depth study, legal, along with the fact that we want to do what is best for the students of this state, for their parents, and for the teachers and the administrators across the way. So I speak for myself, and I know I speak for the committee, in that we are very appreciative for the people who took their time to come before us or to send us all of those hundreds of emails that we have received and read across the thing. I think there's been a great, in-depth, heartfelt study of this issue, and we know that we are the first process, because as was mentioned earlier, this has to go before the legislature, through committee process and all, before it becomes finalized. So at this point, I will make the motion that we give second reading to our regulation of 43-170.
All right, we have a motion from Ms. Allison. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Kriminger. Now, at this point, does anyone wish to be heard on this matter?
I would.
Yes, sir.
So thank you very much for all of the comments. It was good to see a civil discussion. Thank you, both sides. I have some difficulty with one of the things. In fact, you know, the amendments that were discussed this morning generally make it a better regulation. I do have difficulties with one of those amendments, and you spoke about the history of our country and going back to our beginnings. When our Constitution was written, there were some who were even involved in the conversation, who were in the room in Philadelphia, that because of the way the Constitution was written, they didn't want to sign it, they wouldn't vote for it. And in particular, Colonel George Mason of Virginia would not sign the Constitution, did not vote for the Constitution being passed because it didn't contain a Bill of Rights. The British people had had a Bill of Rights for 100 years at that point. And one of the points of that Bill of Rights is the same in our First Amendment, and that is the right of the people to petition their government for the redress of grievance. When I look at this Part 2, limiting who can petition the local board, I see folks not given their rights. We have other taxpayers in the district who are not being given their right to petition their local board. Now, some would say, well, taxpayer standing is not even really a thing. Well, before 1923, that was never even challenged. It continued on, and it was, you know, everyone was able to petition their government at all levels. Eventually, the Supreme Court said, well, in some cases, you can petition the federal government as a taxpayer. In more cases, you could petition your state government as a taxpayer. The idea being, as the taxpayer at the level of government is closer to that taxpayer, the taxpayer has more interest and more rights in being able to petition that government as a taxpayer. The Supreme Court has also been pretty clear that when we look at municipal and local governments, taxpayer standing is absolutely a thing. That when we get down to the local level, taxpayers should be able to petition their government. And so I can't imagine a level of government closer to the people than the local school board. That is about as close to the people as you get. When I look at my tax bill for my car, or I've got a second house that my mother stays in, and things like that, when I look at those bills, in my county, it's 80 or 85% of the tax goes to the school district. Because I don't have children in a district, this regulation would say I have no rights to petition my local government, my school board, with respect to any of these materials, no matter how offensive I found it.
And I do think what we would do is, at this point, in an effort to move forward, we will take that under advice based on clarification from the parliamentarian. What I need to do is clarify the vote for the committee so that we can move this or not move this forward. We either move it or not move it forward based on the subcommittee itself. There has been a motion made by Representative Allison or Miss Allison, and we have a second by Ms. Kriminger. At this point, for now, all of that can be addressed, but would have to be addressed in the full board meeting. So at this point, I would like to say that the motion has been made. We have had a second to present the information presented to us by Mr. Coleman for this subcommittee. All of those on this subcommittee in favor of moving it to the agenda this afternoon, if you would indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. So at this point, that would have been done. We moved that forward to the afternoon, and then you can bring forward this afternoon. Thank you again very much for that. There is a for information item. Basil Harris, if you are in here, please.
Good morning to Board Chair Shields, to the board members. I am Basil Harris, the team leader for innovation and support in the Office of Federal and State Accountability. The purpose of this report is to provide an update regarding the waivers that have been granted to districts by the South Carolina Department of Education. Pursuant to State Board of Education Regulation 43-261, the State Board of Education may waive any regulation that would impede the implementation of an approved district strategic plan or school renewal plan. The state superintendent or her designee has the ability to waive regulatory requirements for similarly situated school districts and schools. The South Carolina Department of Education must report to the State Board of Education all waivers issued by the agency. Therefore, between May and November of 2023, the South Carolina Department of Education approved waivers for 8 school districts, and this list has been provided to you as information. And this concludes my report.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Now we move to item number 7, the consent agenda. Is there a motion to place action item 1, the second reading, proposed State Board of Education Regulation SE Code 43170, to the consent agenda?
I so moved.
Do not. Do not. All right, hold up. Parliamentarian corrects me. It is perfectly fine. It will not. Take it back. I'll take it back. Just following the laws that are sort of helping me through. I'm not as able-minded as Mr. Coleman and others in the legal profession. So I will say that at that time, it will be brought to the regular agenda, not on the consent agenda. So it'll be on the regular agenda. Just wanted clarification to make sure everybody understood. So that having been said, thank you again for coming and reading to us. Everybody, guys, listen, thank you. Thank you from both sides. Last night's devotion for me was a very difficult one that most people don't apply to anymore. It was Matthew, oddly enough, we've mentioned him today, dealt with the part of the Sermon on the Mount that people just sometimes don't always like to listen to, and that's love your enemies. We people, whether you believe, don't believe, accept, don't accept, we can do our part to respect those who are not quite always like us. Please be reminded of that we have been called to a great task of being the best person we can be, regardless of a religious affiliation, and to make the country as good as we can and civil discourse as meaningful as we can. With that having been said, it's 10:19. We adjourn this meeting. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you.